Episode 94, Learning to be Present with Denita Bremer.
Welcome to Latter-day Life Coaches, the podcast where each episode is a conversation between me, Heather Rackham, and one of my amazing coach colleagues. Each coach here is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and certified through the Life Coach School. Together, we have one main goal, helping you live your best life no matter what. You ready for this conversation with the coach? Here we go.
In a world that is swirling and on the go at a rapid and constant pace, it can be very difficult to be in the presence of what is right in front of you. But it is presence that actually allows us to more fully partake of the life we want to live. Coach Denita Bremer defines presence as the state of being fully in the moment physically, emotionally, and spiritually, right here and right now. When we can drop into this space is when we have less resistance and anxiety and more flow and ease. Christ was a great example of living in the present. Denita so beautifully shares that he was able to do this because he had learned that being the Son of God is what gave him his power, not what he accomplished in his life. The same is true for each of us. Our power comes from who we are, not what we do. So come listen to the podcast today and learn some great tips on how to be present so that you can access the true power of who you are instead of what you do or do not do in your life.
Welcome to the podcast today, everybody. I'm so glad to be here, and I'm glad to be joined by Coach Denita Bremer. Denita, thank you so much for being here today on our podcast. I love all the coaches so much that I get to interact with here and that are listed on the directory. It's always fun to get to talk with you guys in person. I call it in person, but it's via Zoom, but it's still fantastic.
Well, thank you. I'm honored to have a few minutes here with the audience. I'm Denita Bremer. I'm coming to you from outside of Denver, Colorado. I'm married. I have 3 teenagers. I feel very neutral about them because they're both amazing and sometimes very terrible. I've been a certified coach for almost 4 years, which is just insane how fast that has gone. And the story behind that is that my family moved to Germany for a year, and we came from sunny Colorado. And I went to Germany, northern Germany, where it was cold and wet and gray. And all of a sudden, overnight, I was homeschooling my kids, and homeschooling is illegal in Germany. So they were going to an international school, and I got depressed. And so I actually searched in my podcast app for like LDS depression help, and I found Jody Moore. And that introduced me to the world of life coaching. And it was just a love affair after that. So actually coaching has really been a faith journey for me. I never thought I would have my own business. I never thought I would do anything but be a stay-at-home mom. But the Spirit was like, you need to coach. So I signed up for training, and I've been doing this business thing for a few years now. And yeah, it's been a meandering journey. I've had a lot of different areas of focus, but right now I'm settled on being a trauma coach for LDS moms and coaches. And right now I'm really fascinated with how presence comes into that work. So that's me.
Thank you so much. There's a couple things that, first of all, homeschooling is illegal in Germany. That's really interesting to me. I guess I didn't really consider that as being a privilege that we have here.
Yeah, it actually was one of the considerations that we were like, do we want to go? Do we not want to go? We love homeschooling, but if we go, then we can travel. And so we just were like, okay, let's just go on an adventure. But it was kind of hard for me at the time to all of a sudden be released from that calling, so to speak. And then when we came back a year later, both my girls, I have 2 girls and a boy, they decided they didn't want to do homeschooling anymore. And there was one in high school, one in middle school, and one in elementary. And I was just like, okay, if 2 of you don't want to homeschool, then all 3 of you are going to school because I can't do all of it at once. So Yeah. So it
So
was
big
kind of
change. Yeah.
a lot of big changes right during that time. Yeah.
It's so interesting to me because the more coaches I talk to, which is a lot, the more everybody's story seems so familiar. They just start, their lives were changed and they've never thought that this was going to be something they did. And they just started feeling this nudge, this almost call to do it. I feel so grateful that people are following that nudge because there's so much help that's needed. And it takes more than one or two of us. So it takes a lot of us to be able to fill those needs. So anyway, I just think it's very interesting that it's so common. The
I
story
think
sounds
it's
so
like
familiar.
missionary work. Like
Yeah.
we need thousands, hundreds of thousands of missionaries to go spread the gospel, right? And
Mm-hmm.
mental illness and emotional health and all of these topics are a similar thing. In fact, I kind of view them as obstacles to growing closer to Christ or the gospel or whatever, right? And so I think
Mm-hmm.
the Lord is just putting all these amazing tools into our lives, and we need an army of coaches. So, yeah.
That's interesting you said that because when I was doing my certification, I was in person for a week with these other coaches. And that's the phrase that kept coming to my mind. Like, are you going to join the army? Like, this is an army that you need to join. This is an army that you need to join. And I kept thinking, that's so crazy. But I felt like that was it. That was the phrase that just kept moving me forward. So it's funny that you said
Totally.
that.
I feel the same way. Yes.
Okay. And then trauma. Say that phrase again, like the people that you're working with right now.
Trauma coach for LDS moms and coaches. I actually, that coach piece, I've been very resistant to. I've been like, I'm not qualified to like coach coaches, but I had several people ask me all sort of different, one of those sort of like synchronicities. Would you ever consider teaching this to coaches? And at first I was like, no, that's not me. Go to someone else who knows more. But then enough things kept coming up that I was like, wait a second, is this like the Spirit trying to catch my attention? And so I had to sit with it and really like sort out what my fears were, my doubts and all of that. And so I decided to kind of bring in coaches. And I think a big part of that is that the way I operate is whatever I'm learning, whatever I am, that's sort of what I speak about. And so I'm an LDS mom, I'm a coach. And so those are sort of the two things that I talk a lot about. And I've tried to just focus on one or the other, and I just can't. It's just like, this is who I am. So I talk about coaching tools and business. And I also talk about being a mom and those kinds of struggles and like marriage and mom. And just like, really, I consider myself kind of a general life coach, but my area that I'm wanting to sort of hone in on is trauma and emotional processing. I think they're kind of the same thing. My childhood, my past is very full of trauma, and I'm realizing that I can't really separate that out. There came a day when I decided, oh, I actually have to address the trauma. That's what's holding me back in a lot of ways. And so I've been really diving into that the last year and a half. So it's kind of a twofold mission here, but
I think there's a lot of us that hear the word trauma and think, well, that's not me. I didn't have any trauma in my childhood. But the more I learn and the more I explore and study, we all have trauma. Like just being a child is traumatic, can have trauma, involved in there. And there is bigger traumas. Some people will say like big T trauma and little t trauma. I don't know that there's any value in necessarily separating those, but I think it's important for everybody to address and take a look at the things that have happened in their lives that are having lasting effects. And
so I define trauma as really any unresolved nervous system response. And usually that's an emotion. So most of us, 99% of people, I would say, have unresolved emotions from something that happened earlier in their lives or something that happened today. Right. many, many people, it's not to the point where they feel like they need help with it, but it is kind of a thing that we don't even realize how it is affecting us.
Right.
So yeah, I agree
Yeah, we
that
don't
most people have
see,
trauma.
yeah, we don't see how it's holding us back. And it sounds like you kind of started to see that it was holding you back.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it does take help for us to see where, if we're not progressing, it's oftentimes linked to something that we need to take care of.
Yeah. And
that's unresolved. I like that word.
yes. And I will say, because the coach directory here is all life coach school coaches, one thing that it has helped me with is having a more holistic approach, because I went head first into like your thoughts and your feelings and your actions and the model, and I was all in on that. And it helped me a ton, but I hit kind of a wall with it. And that's when I was like, I started feeling discouraged and like, why am I not like all these other coaches that have these stories about like how, oh my gosh, coaching has just changed my life and everybody can see it. They can see me and be like, wow, mom's different. I don't have that story. And I got to a point where I was like, what is happening? And I had to be really honest with myself. And for me, what it was I realized I had some fear around really being seen, like in my business, being out there, people knowing me. As soon as I had a little bit of success, I'd be like, ooh, and I would shrink back again. And I had a coach who basically taught me that this is like your nervous system. This is not your thoughts, right? And so I was sort of like, oh, and honestly, I was a little disappointed. Like I wanted it to all be my thoughts, right? And to be able to like do everything with thought work. And I started working with a coach that does more of the somatic body work and just the deep processing. And that's when I was like, oh, this like for me, because I do have so much trauma in my past that I basically tried to ignore and run away from. That was the piece that I really, really needed. And I've found now I feel like now I'm moving the needle. And I'm just like, no, I want everyone to know about all of these things. So.
Okay. So one of the things you talked about, you said, is presence. You have found so much value in being present as you help people work through trauma and yourself through trauma. That's a buzzword we hear. Maybe I shouldn't even say a buzzword, but it is a word that we hear a lot of lately. And I would love for you to maybe define for us how you view presence and what that even means.
Yeah. And I do think it's sometimes hard to define because presence is actually an experience. It's like felt in our bodies. And so when we try to fit words around it, it can be a little bit different for each person. So my definition is the state of being fully in the moment, physically, emotionally, mentally, even spiritually, right? Like to have your whole self right here, right now, which is a really hard thing to do, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. I'm like sitting here thinking about that, and I have to take a pause because I often think about the times that I think that I'm being present in a conversation with my child, and I know that I'm physically there and I'm like 90% there, like focused, but the rest of me is kind of like looking ahead to something else. And it's hard to be all there.
Yeah. And honestly, I would say that we probably are never 100%. But even probably the average American, the average person on earth is only like, I don't know, 30% or something. They've got all these distractions and things going on in their lives that are keeping them from being present. Even like as you're driving around, do you ever have that experience where you're like, oh, I know I drove, but I don't actually remember driving this stretch.
Oh, how did I get here? It's terrifying.
Yeah, because we've been driving for years and years. And so we don't need to like be focused on, how do I hold the steering wheel and what pedal do I push or whatever. I have a 15-year-old who's learning how to drive. So I'm reminded of those days, but that part has become automatic. So then our brains can go to another place. Right. And so it is actually very adaptive to do that. It's very efficient, right? Except for when we're so used to it, then we are in relationship with someone. This is the area I think that helps the most, is when we're in relationship with someone, we're still doing it, right? We're still like, our brain's over there, like what's for dinner or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
And so the practice of bringing yourself back to like, let's all be here, it's just such a good practice, right? And I think what it really does for us is it brings a lot of ease into our life that we don't realize we're not even tapping into and is available for us.
So that was my next question, is tell me some of the benefits that you think people have from staying present and starting to practice presence in their lives. And I guess one of those would be some ease, some ease that comes in. What else would you say?
Well, I think that's the biggest thing, is like less resistance, less anxiety. It's not a word I relate to, but a lot of people do. Kind of more flow. I think that's sort of the overall umbrella, is that it helps us when our brains are not split into 15 places. It helps us to have that flow and that ease. And I kind of think it helps me, as I've learned to practice it, it helps me to know. It's like this inner knowing of what's next. What should I be thinking about? Where do I want to go from here? Like in my business, with my kids, right? I have found, like my whole entire life, I was a good student. I graduated valedictorian. I have always been like a planner. Like I have to do this and then I have to do that, like out a week or 2 weeks. And practicing this presence has helped me, I almost want to say, not need to plan so much. I still plan, and that's still part of my routine, but it's more of like a self-trust and like just kind of a going with the flow, responding to the things that come up. At least for me, since have been a stay-at-home mom and I still have 3 kids at home. My oldest is about to go off to college on another continent. But that whole, like that phase of life of, it's like my husband can go to work and come home and he's not thinking about who needs to be picked up and where do they need to go and all of those things. And I'm always like, okay, I'm going to miss something. I'm going to forget. I'm going to whatever. And practicing presence has really helped me just lean into this. I just trust myself. I'm going to totally know where I need to go, what I need to do, how to do it. And so it really, all of those little things have been such an energetic drain on me. And it has helped me to kind of keep my energy right now and the next thing, not 15 things away. Mm-hmm. So it's really more about the feeling of whatever it is you're doing versus the actual results you're getting. It's not really about like getting more money or having more time or those kinds of things. Although I do think it actually helps our brains focus on the absolutely necessary things, which does move the needle and as far as time and money go.
Right.
But it's really more about the feeling of your life in general.
Like I spend so much of my day not liking the feeling that I have, the feeling that's kind of overall in my life, meaning I'm not really an anxious person, but I sometimes feel this like underlying hum of a little bit of agitation. And when I can remind myself to just stop thinking about all the things, kind of what you're talking about, that low-lying level of agitation goes away. I'm able to just be in the moment. And sometimes I think we think that multitasking is a superpower. And multitasking always happens in my brain. It's not things I'm physically doing. It's thinking about all the different things at one time. And it is not helpful for me. I'm realizing. And so when I can just refocus and come back to a present state, that hum that I don't like will go away.
Yeah. And I think this is just another way of getting at, like with thought work, we would come at it with how do you talk to yourself and being kind to yourself. This is just, for some people, that's not as effective to like focus on thoughts for whatever reason, because everybody is different. it's just a way to enter it kind of at the feeling line.
Yeah.
And, or even at the action line, right? I'm going to practice this. It's going to feel differently. And then I'm going to have different thoughts about it. Right. So that's what I have noticed in my life. I tried to, and I still do the thought work of how am I treating myself? How am I talking to myself? But this practice, this presence practice has been easier to shift kind of how I feel about myself and my life, and to get to that sort of like centered, grounded place is, I don't know how I would say it. Those are also sort of buzzwords, right?
Yeah.
But it's that place where you are just you, right? You're just like truly you. You don't have to filter. You don't have to be, different for somebody. It's just the essence of you. That's what another way I would kind of characterize presence. And that's when that hum goes away, right? Because we're not trying to shift things. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Most of our audiences here is going to be members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And we do tend, because sometimes we categorize things into things that we should do and things we shouldn't do, we do tend to kind of have this pull of, I need to be doing more of this and I need to be doing more of that. That kind of tends to just seep into our, I think, unconsciousness. We don't even necessarily recognize that. How do we reconcile that? How do we kind of sit more present with all of those things that we want to be doing and not have that constant chaos?
Yes. I love this question so much, because what I realized was that it's like a separate paradigm. When we're focused on what should I do? What shouldn't I do? It's a whole different paradigm than being present. Presence kind of shifts us up, I would say, like up in consciousness to a paradigm of being instead of having or doing. And there's nothing wrong with being in the having or the doing. It's just sort of like developmental phases for our emotions, kind of. And I was thinking of it in terms of like, if you look at your kindergartner or an early elementary kid, what are their worries and thoughts and what are they focused on? It's going to be totally different than a high school senior or somebody who's in college, right? They're just in a different place. And that's sort of how I see this idea of, yes, we have a lot of demands on our time, but when we're focused on who am I being, then all the doing stuff kind of falls into place. And I honestly think most of us have been taught to focus on the doing part. Even like, I kind of think our education system reinforces this idea. Like you do certain things so that you can be a certain type of student or whatever. So we come by it honestly, right? But what I'm learning is when we can focus on the being, which I actually think is what Heavenly Father wants for us, then it becomes so clear what I should do, what I should focus on, right? Doing like the shoulds, the shouldn'ts. It's sort of like how the law of Moses got swallowed up in the higher law of love your neighbor, love Christ, love God. It's like this, all the focus of the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and what should I be doing gets swallowed up in this sort of higher paradigm, so to speak, of just who am I? Who am I being? What do I want to feel? And from that place, that, like I said, that centered, grounded place, then things become more obvious instead of trying to guess ahead of time.
Yeah, I love that. I was actually talking with a client this afternoon, and she was kind of sharing some of her feelings about her relationship with God and how she feels like so much of her focus in her lifetime has been on the shoulds and shouldn'ts, that her relationship with God, it has not been the focus. It's been on the lists. And I think that paradigm, that shift is our relationship with God. Like when we're able to look up and kind of step away from that, our relationship with God changes. We discover more fully who we are, and we're able to live from that place. And the other things just start, like you said, just are a side effect. Like that's where we want to be. That's part of who we want to be that starts coming out, and our focus shifts there.
Yeah. I'm just reminded that Christ's power didn't come from anything he did. And that might be a little bit of like a, huh? What? But his power actually comes from who he is. He is the only begotten Son of God the Father, right? And yes, he did perform the atonement. He did perform miracles, right? He taught, he did all of these things, but they flowed from who he was. And so if we can remember, oh, I'm a daughter of God, my power also comes from who I am, not from what I do. And that's kind of a hard shift to make, because at least for me, I've lived my life going like, wait, what? My value and my power doesn't come from the fact that I got good grades and that I'm being a good mom and all of that. Right.
Yeah, because we're looking externally to outside validation for other people to see, and to like the things that we're doing and to approve, rather than seeing our intrinsic value is all, that's who we are. That's what gives us power, is who we are.
Well, and the truth is, we're humans with our most dominant sense is vision and hearing. It's those things that take the sensory input from external to us and bring it in, right? So it's natural and normal to rely on those things. It goes against the natural man, so to speak, to rely on our internal experience, right? How do we feel? What is our relationship with God, which is like a spirituality kind of thing, right? And so for anybody who's like, oh, don't feel wrong for being that way, and it's reinforced by our culture, by our religion, all of these things, but it's just a shift, right? And it's like swimming upstream, because we've got the natural man who wants to rely on our sight, our hearing, our taste, all of these things. And I think the spirit within us wants to rely on those spiritual promptings and feelings and thoughts, and that's all internal.
I don't think we give enough voice or enough credit to the internal. We haven't learned and honed in on how to pay attention to that very well. There's so much power there that is untapped.
Yeah, that's okay. We're doing it now.
Yeah.
We're teaching each other now.
Are.
And I think this is what the Gathering of Zion is all about, is like making that shift.
Yeah.
So.
And for me, that's what is so exciting, is there is so much power that we have yet to see. We are just starting to scratch the surface of what we are capable of. And it's super exciting to me. And that's, I think, why I love these conversations so much, because they're helping us get there. They're helping us get this full vision that we have not quite been able to see yet. So,
yes. And I couldn't have gotten here to understanding these internal things without first going through the door of thought work and like having awareness over my thoughts and my feelings. It's just sort of a deeper level. Mm-hmm. So I think we need all of it.
I agree. I've seen this same progression for me, and I certainly needed to start in one place. I mean, it's like that with all of us, right? We have to start someplace for a reason, but it's taken me here to where I am now. And I love it. So
isn't it such a wild ride? It's awesome.
It is. It's crazy. I would love for you to share with us if any tricks or tools that you have in helping us to be more present.
Yes. Okay. So the first couple are just the willingness to try it out. Because like I said, this is an experience that happens in your body. And if you try to come at it with like, well, why should I even do that from a brain level, then it's maybe going to take a little bit of time to get yourself on board. We kind of talked about separating our value from what we do, what our accomplishments are. And that's kind of sometimes a difficult shift. It's been a difficult shift for me. Mm-hmm. But as far as like hands-on tips and tricks, I have a few. The first one, I kind of want to zoom out and talk about many people I'm sure are familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and how at the bottom of the triangle, the base of the triangle, are the physiological and safety needs. And then you move up to like belonging and self-esteem. And at the very tip of the triangle is like your life's purpose, right? This is sort of how I think of presence as well. It's this continuum. And it's really hard to be present if you're tired or hungry, right? If you're like, if your body is screaming at you, feed me, then it's going to be really hard to practice presence. So the first thing is to just be aware of and taking care of your physical needs, which I think a lot of us overlook. We're like, I can push through that. I don't care, whatever. But it's so important to your internal experience, like we were talking about. Some of the things that I do, I wear an Oura ring that tracks my sleep and my activity stats. I walk every day. I track my water. I don't drink any sugar, hardly ever. I eat very little sugar. So those are some sort of just like baseline, just body needs, right? But assuming many people have those things in place, because I'm sure so many of the audience are even better at that than I am. A few other things are breathing. So one thing, I was blown away when I started learning about breath work and like the impact it has. And one thing that I learned was we talk about like drinking lots of water to sort of detox our bodies, but your breath it's like 85% of where your toxins come out of your body. So learning to consciously breathe as like a tool, right? And the easiest thing is just 3 slow, deep breaths in through your nose and exhales out through your nose. And it's like a reset to just kind of bring you back to the present moment, right? That's something that I have loved doing and practicing, and it's a really easy tool. The second one is meditation, which kind of goes along with presence as far as like, it's one of those things that is scientifically proven to have all these benefits, has I don't know of any drawbacks to it. And yet I don't know a lot of people that do it, that practice it on a regular basis. And I will say there's a million ways to meditate, but the way that I love the most is a Christ-centered visualization meditation. And there's an app called the Small Seed. I think it's called Small Seed something, but if you Google the Small Seed, it'll come up. And it's Christ-centered visualization meditations. And that has really revolutionized my prayer, but also I do at least 10 minutes a day. And it like creates this space in my life to be able to like slow down and just be. So that's one.
I have to just say, you're the second person who has told me about that app in the last 3 days. So clearly that's something that I need to check out.
You need to check it out.
Okay. Sorry. I interrupted you.
No problem. The third thing I would say is a digital sunrise and or sunset. And I know like I was so resistant to this as well, but as I've been practicing it for about 9 months, 7 months, maybe, it's been really impactful in my life. And I think it's because of that draw to social media and podcasts and all the things we do on our phones, especially having a digital sunrise. So a time between when you wake up in the morning and when you actually get on a screen, or a sunset, some buffer time between when you fall asleep to, before that, when you are not on screens. There's all this science about the brain waves and all of that, but it's really, really useful, especially if you find yourself constantly distracted and those kinds of things. It's just, again, like a space creating tool. And that's a lot what presence is just creating space to be, whatever that is for you in that moment. One other quick tool it's called orienting. And there are also a million ways to do this. But the way I like to do, especially if you feel anxiety or stress in new situations, is you look around the space, the room, slowly and curiously, and make sure to kind of like slowly move your neck around. The reason for this is that if you think of like an animal in nature and you're walking along and you startle them, they get very stiff and still and they don't look around, right? That's sort of a response that we have. We focus in. But when we are looking around slowly, easily, being curious, moving our bodies like we're totally safe, it sends our brain a signal that we're safe and that we can be at ease here. And so that's a tool that I really love. And you can do it in a room full of people and they don't even know you're doing it. You can also orient to yourself internally. So kind of like looking around a room, just looking around, what are my feelings? What are the sensations happening in my body? Another thing you can do in a group of people, whatever's happening, it's kind of like the surface level of processing emotions, if anybody's ever talked about that on the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just a really simple, you can just do it for a few seconds or longer. It's again, like coming in at the feeling line, telling your brain, we're safe here. It's okay. We can relax. And then the last one that I just can't not mention is yoga, because yoga brings together breath work, orienting to our bodies, meditation. It's kind of like a meditation. And in fact, it evolved out of needing to switch positions in order to be able to meditate longer. So I love yoga. It has really helped me. And I do like 5 minutes of yoga a day. I don't go to classes. I don't get out my mat and do an hour of yoga a day. I literally do like 3 cat cows, sometimes a few more minutes than that. And just that, giving myself time of like, this is like something I do for me. And I'm focused on how does my body feel and how do I want to move and all of that. That's another way to practice presence. So those are 5 kind of quick, easy tools that you can pick up and do, except for the digital sunrise.
Well, I love that phrase. I haven't heard it used in that way before, digital sunrise and digital sunset. Do you do it on both ends, or do you pick one or the other?
My goal right now is an hour a day off of screens. And okay. I try to have some time right after I wake up and some time right before I go to sleep. I'm much better in the morning than I am in the evening. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of my next step, is to be more focused on that evening routine. Okay. But I do generally hit that hour a day every day. Usually it's almost all top heavy in the morning. I just don't let myself get on my phone the first hour I'm awake. So
I find for me, it's easier for me to be more intentional in the morning than it is for the evening. Maybe it's just I'm tired and I'm not able to access that part of my brain where I'm intentional, but so much easier for me to do that in the morning too. But
it's easier for me too.
Yeah. And I also love that you said you just do yoga for 5 minutes a day, because I like to do yoga, but I'm always thinking to myself, well, I don't have 45 minutes where I want to go do that right now. But even just those small minutes are helpful. And it's like that with everything. Why is it that we think it has to be 45 minutes of reading our scriptures, or, we forget there's power in the small. It's the small and simple things where great things are brought to pass. We all know that scripture.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is like, I don't have like I'm going to sit here and be present. These are all the things I do to create space in my life to feel into who am I, right? And not who is the world telling me I am.
Right.
So, I mean, you can sit and just be like, I'm just going to like breathe and not listen to anything and just be. Some people love that as well. If you live near water, I think it's so powerful to just be in the water. The other thing I do is I walk every day. And I just love just looking at the trees and the sky and noticing the bugs and whatever, the birds, right? That is also kind of a presence exercise of, do you notice what's here now?
Right.
So these are all the things that none of them are hard. It's just, we have to be intentional.
Right.
The easy things to do are easy not to do as well.
That is very true. Gosh, thank you so much for sharing those with. I think they are very helpful and easy things that we can all add that will make a big difference. And isn't it interesting? I think we said this before we hit record, that these are easy things, but sometimes it's the easy things that are the hardest for us to do. And I find that so fascinating and intriguing, but that is what it is, right? And so it's just for us to pay attention to those small things that are out there, that are available, that we can make time for in our life, because they do all add up. So thank
Yeah.
you, Denita, so much for sharing those with us. Before we go, would you mind sharing with everybody where they can find more of you?
Yes. So my website, denitabremer.com, is kind of the hub for all the things. But I also do have my own podcast. It's called the Why Not Me podcast. And I'm doing a giveaway right now. I think it'll still be going by the time this podcast airs, but I'm giving away 2 pair of Apple AirPods. So pop over and figure out how to enter that. Just listen to one of the recent podcast episodes and you'll find that information. And then I didn't create any kind of like go download this tips, tricks, because presence is such an experience and not like, I don't want people to really just be thinking about it. I want you to be experiencing it. So a little carrot to entice you is if you go to my website, there will be a button there to sign up for a free session. And when you sign up for that free session, if somewhere in the description, somewhere in that sign up, you put Latter-day Life Coaches, I will create a personalized meditation for anyone who comes. That's related directly to whatever struggle you bring.
That is fantastic. Anything that feels personalized is so useful, so powerful for us.
Yeah. So I'm excited for that. See if anybody takes me up on it.
Okay. I hope so. They should. So, all right, everybody, take her up on that. And thank you for being here, Denita. This was fantastic, like always. And thank you to everybody who's listening. And if anything has resonated with you here, we would love to hear about it. You can message us, email at ldslifecoaches.com. If you have any questions for Denita, I'm sure you can contact her via her website. And thank you to everyone for just being part of this community. So thank you, Denita, so much.
Thank you, Heather, for hosting. You're awesome.
Hey, we just wanted to thank you for spending part of your day here with us at Latter-day Life Coaches and being part of this conversation. Share this with your friends so that you can have a conversation with them on this topic as well. And as always, subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. Have a good one, my friends.